So in this video, I'm going to analyze a game that I played last week. It was just a casual game, and I started with e4 and decided to play the King's Gambit. My opponent went knight c6, and after knight f3, took the pawn. And I was happy to see this move because, well, now I can play d4, which is what you want to do in the King's Gambit, to have the two pawns in the center of the board. And, well, d4 also allows the bishop to attack the pawn. So here my opponent surprised me with this move, d5. And, well, I didn't know this variation, the MacLeod defense, and I played this move, e5, which is not very good at all. In this position, surprisingly enough, there's really only one move that maintains white's advantage, and that is to capture on e5. Now, there was a game from this position between Garakamsky and Shakhriyar Mamyadarov, which obviously went e takes d5 because, well, they're just very strong players. And after this move, well, there's several moves that give black a, well, not a winning advantage, but a significant advantage. And one of those was the move that my opponent played, bishop g4. And already he has a threat, which is to capture the knight. And if I recapture with the queen, well, then the pawn on d4 is going to fall. And if I take with the pawn, then queen h4 check is also very good for black. So there are a few ways to meet this threat. I chose bishop e2. I could have also played c3, but the best move in this position by far is bishop b5. But I didn't like this because, well, after a6 I kind of had to take the knight, and I didn't want to play this position without the light square bishop, because when you play the King's Gambit, usually the light squared bishop is crucial to creating a mating attack against the enemy king. Although, to be fair, usually that happens when the bishop is on c4, which you can't in this position, or d3. So for that reason, I decided to play bishop e2. And here my opponent recaptured, which I don't think is a very good move, even though the engine thinks it is, although it probably is going to change its mind after, right now it's only at depth 15, so if you let it run to depth 28 or 30, then I'm pretty sure it's going to find another move. I think g5 is actually a much better move, defending this pawn. And, well, g5 is just a thematic move in the King's Gambit. I tell my students that if you're gonna trade a piece, then it has to be either forced or fantastic. If it's not one of those two, then it's just foolish. And in this position, it's not forced. It's not like you have to take the knight. And, well, is it fantastic for black? I mean, you're giving up the pair of bishops, and you've only developed two pieces, and you're going to trade one of those pieces. So you're going to be moving this bishop twice, one to g4, and then again to recapture a knight that's only moved once, which just doesn't make a lot of sense. So after recapturing, I have to take back with the bishop. And here my opponent played g5. Unfortunately, he had a much better move, queen h4 check. And after king f1, well, there are a couple of variations in the King's Gambit where white does allow the queen check on h4, and the king is actually perfectly fine on f1. But in this position specifically, it's not. And as you can see by the evaluation, black is actually significantly better. So after g5, I played h4, which is also thematic, to try to break up the pawns on g5 and f4. Sometimes black pushes the pawn, or sometimes you protect it with h6. So in this position, my opponent took, and I don't like this move at all, because now you have these double isolated pawns, which are just weak. And well, I think both of these pawns are going to be recaptured at some point. So I took one of the pawns, and here my opponent played knight g e7, and well, it's already given white a pretty decent advantage. If I had the black pieces, I probably would have played something like, I don't know, developing the bishop maybe to e7, or maybe g7, although I mean the bishop in g7 is kind of biting on granite because of the two pawns. So after this move, I went bishop g5, pinning the knight against the queen. And here my opponent played queen d7, which is understandable because you don't really want to castle kingside anymore now that your king is going to be exposed along this g file. But just tactically, it's not working for black because of bishop g4, and now my opponent made a huge blunder with f5. The only move to try to save the game is knight f5, and here, well, the engine thinks that castles is the best move, just putting more pressure on the knight, and well, the variations get very complicated. You take the knight, and well, if you take with the queen, eventually you knight takes and bishop takes with check. White ends up being just slightly better, so I thought, well, why not just put pressure on the knight? If the knight moves, then you just win this knight on f5 basically for free. But there is this move, rook g8, and again, there are several options. You could take this knight, or you can move the bishop. So let's say bishop takes h4. Obviously you cannot capture because then you lose the queen. But here black can sacrifice the exchange by taking on g4, and after queen takes, there's this incredible move, knight e2 check, and after queen recaptures, then knight takes h4. I mean, this is still better for white, but it's not like you have to resign. But after f5, you can recapture en passant, which is what I did. So you're attacking the knight and you're attacking the queen. And the only move to save the knight is to go knight f5. And here, well, the engine prefers castles. Even f7 check is winning apparently. But I just played the most natural and probably human move, queen e2 check. And here king d8 was the last chance that my opponent had to try to survive. Instead, he played knight c7, just giving back a piece, but that's not really going to help because I just capture it, and after bishop takes, well, there's a nice little tactic if you wanna, well, you can see the move. I just recapture, and you obviously cannot capture the bishop because you hang mate in 1, which is what happened in the game. So yeah, the King's Gambit is very tricky for both sides. So I hope you liked the video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you next time.